Joining me now is body language expert Paul Boross to give a bit more of an insight into how the world leaders might be feeling. Really good to see you.
Lovely to see you, Gamal.
What can we expect from this G7 summit in Canada, would you say?
Well, I think that you're going to see more power plays from Donald Trump. Obviously, we've got a lot of alpha people all in one place. But there is one person who considers himself the most alpha of all. And I think Donald Trump, and I think we've already seen a little bit on the lead up to it, is actually just going to double up with those things.
There he is now meeting Justin Trudeau and his wife Sophie. I mean, what can you tell us about his body language, his positioning?
Well, if you see, when he goes in for a handshake, he has to control. So his arm, his left arm is always on the arm or on the shoulder, which basically is telling Trudeau, from a psychological perspective, I control you. I'm in charge. And he uses that all the time just to show that he is the alpha male in the room. And so if you notice that Trudeau is actually quite sort of relaxed, but his hands sort of give away that he's not particularly affectionate towards Trump. He's actually showing, I like to keep a bit of distance between the two of us. But they're experts at actually showing what they want to show. And it takes psychologists like myself to come in and see what lies beneath.
And what about the Prime Minister, Theresa May, arriving with her husband, Philip, today? She's had a pretty tough week. Does the body express that? Does the body show that?
Yes, she is definitely looking sort of tired. And if you look at her shoulders, the weight of the world is upon her. And so she's never the most comfortable person in any room or at any summit. But you can actually see that there is a large part of her who doesn't want to be there. You know, she's going through the motions. You can see from her body language, she knows what to do, and she does it very, very competently. But is there the heart there? Is there the fight there anymore? I think that she's losing. Well, as you would expect after a week like she's had, she's actually sort of a little tired from the whole experience.
And what about the French President, Macron? Him and Justin Trudeau were highly critical of President Trump earlier this week when they're talking about these, this issue with tariffs. I mean, you know, he's young, he's fresh in many ways. I mean, what do you read what do you gauge from this body language?
Well, if you look at him, he has a brilliant smile. And I think it was the comedian Victor Borg who said, you know, a smile is the quickest way to connect to anybody. It's the shortest distance between two people. And that smile is his weapon of choice, really. Look at any stage now. Now, there is genuine affection between Macron and Trudeau.
Very different to what we saw with President Trump and Prime Minister May.
Absolutely. And what you can tell is sometimes that it's the body that leads. People who actually do like each other turn their bodies. It's like an arrow pointing to the other person. Now, some people, and when you see some people, and people watch out for this, you see some people with Trump, their heads will turn towards him, but their body will stay away. And this underlies the way, their true feeling and the psychology behind it.
And just finally, just before we end, I mean, how aware are these world leaders about their body language? I mean, will they have advisors to tell them, look, you do this thing with your hands, you need to stop it?
Oh, they have so many advisors. They are actually trained to within an inch of their lives. But under pressure, these things go. So that's why at these very pressurised events like the G7 summit, you actually see the true person coming out and what happens when pressure mounts.
Fascinating stuff. Paul, thanks for coming in. Very interesting. You're watching Sky News.
We've been looking very closely about the way they've been interacting in these meetings. What can we tell about how they're feeling from their body language? I'm joined now by Paul Boross, who is a communications and body language expert. Hopefully you can shed some light on exactly how confident they looked, Paul, and what you're reading into their language. We had that slow motion walk towards each other. then the handshake, handled in different ways by each leader. What did you read into it?
Well, it's very interesting that, everything, first of all, was very staged. Now, we expected that as they walked together, that they'd both be very aware of the old phrase that you never get a second chance to make a first impression. And so I think that it was probably everything both of them expected. If you watch the handshake when it comes up in a moment, what you'll see is that they're both very, very aware that handshake is going to be the defining moment. Now, Trump, of course, tries to overtake it with the pat and sort of control, which is a control indicator. But everything up until now is actually very, very sort of very staged. And now Trump tries to take over, and he is doing as many pats as he can, which is very interesting because actually it doesn't necessarily show the man who's in charge. What it actually shows is the man who's desperate to be seen to be in charge. And that's, I think, where Kim actually stays very still, doesn't react to the touches, and actually, I think, controls the situation without having to be seen to control the situation.
Well, that's interesting. You're saying that Donald Trump looks like he's trying a bit too hard and that his counterpart is projecting more confidence just through that smile, really.
Well, yes, through the smile and also through the general body language. Kim is very good at actually controlling the space.
Sure.
He actually, he's a squat, big man. So, therefore, he takes up a lot more space. And actually, when you look at when they are sitting down together, he's also leaning forward, which is very much, from a body language and psychology perspective, is about power, is about assertiveness. And if you want to assert your power in these situations, you lean forward. And you can see that actually Trump is giving a couple of tells with his hands. So he gets a little bit fidgety with his hands, which is screaming, really, very quietly screaming, impatience, frustration. He just wants to get on with it.
And that's fascinating, isn't it? Because Donald Trump's had a lot more practice at this than Kim Jong-un. Donald Trump's spent his life on television. He's met countless world leaders since his election. He's an accomplished performer in front of the cameras. Kim Jong-un's not left his country, or hadn't left his country until March this year. He's only met Xi Jinping and the president of South Korea, and yet you're saying he's showing more confidence. Is that because he's a natural, or is it that he is feeling like he's sitting in a position of more strength, perhaps, from a negotiating point of view?
I think it's strength. I also think in Asian cultures, I think there is a stillness which actually controls the room. There's an old Chinese saying that he who owns the silence owns the room. But it's very much that way with stillness as well. And when you see him walking, there I go back to him actually taking control of the space. And one of the amusing things for me is that Trump has said that he's 6'3" tall, and he's estimated to be about 6'1". But Kim is estimated to be 5'7". And actually, if you look at that, my guess is that Kim is wearing lifts in his shoes to actually bring his height up to more parity with Trump. So actually, I think that the North Koreans have thought about this very carefully. And look at there is no real height differential that you would expect. You know, if you look at people, and actually people say that actually Kim may be only 5'6" and Donald Trump may be 6'1", but that differential would look more. And so actually, it's not just about the fact that there's a lot more touching and a lot more push forward from Trump. It's actually about the fact that Kim is very still. And if you want to dominate somebody and you want to be seen as the power player in the relationship, stillness is vital.
Still waters run deep. I mean, we're looking at this in a rather gladiatorial sense, aren't we? I suppose what we really need to know is, are they getting on? Any sense of that? Are they? Can you see any chemistry between the two? Are things going well from what the limited we've seen of them?
Yes, I think actually, and one of the signals for that is that they mirror and match each other. So actually, when they're walking very much in sync. They are actually sort of in rhythm. And if you think about it in terms of when people are in love, they tend to mirror and match each other. Now, I'm not saying that they're in love, but what I'm saying is that the natural rapport has started, and you've watched the walk. There's a sync, there's a rhythm to it, which is a good indicator that they are at least comfortable. Very interesting that one of the signifiers of confidence is how high the hand wave goes. Trump, at that point, is waving higher because he feels more confident. At that point, Kim waving lower. So this is a bit of an ebb and flow of who's more confident at one time, who's more confident at another time. It's fascinating, but I mean, I think it's probably a score draw.
Intriguing stuff. Paul Boross, communications expert. Thank you for that.
Because a lot of this is non-verbal communication going on. We are joined rather fortuitously by Paul Boross, a body language expert himself. Very good to talk to you, Paul. Now, talk us through your interpretation of what we've seen of how the two men are getting on, because this is crucial. Donald Trump says it all depends on his assessment of whether Kim Jong-un is a man he can trust. Does their body language tell us they are getting on?
Yes, absolutely, Dermot. It does tell us they're getting on, but, I mean, the first minute was so staged that I think nothing was left to chance by either side. I mean, if you watch what happened in the first minute, they were both so aware that they had to get it right for the watching audiences in their own relative companies. I think Kim had been warned by his people to watch out for Trump's handshake very early on. So he was very worried about the yank shake, as it is called, which Trump did with the Prime Minister of Japan, which lasted 19 seconds, with Trump pulling at him to pull him off balance, which is a traditional Trump trick, shall we just say. But what's happened so far is that they're actually very choreographed. I mean, it's a bit like trying to choreograph Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito, but it's very, very staged at the same time. What I have noticed, Dermot, is that Trump calls himself 6'3", when in fact he's at least 6'1". But Kim is down for being 5'7", and look at that height. There's not that much disparity. So I wouldn't be surprised if I heard that Kim had some rather large lifts in his shoes.
I'll beware North Koreans wearing lifts. The old ones are the best. What about the touching, though, Paul? And it seems to have been Donald Trump touching Kim Jong-un from the start, more or less. I mean, that hand in the back or hand on the arm, that guiding hand, what does that tell us?
Well, it used to be seen as a friendly gesture, but since politicians have taken this over, it's really about control. And Donald Trump is obviously desperate to be seen as the man in control of this situation. So, in fact, he's trying too hard, I think, with the touching all the time, and then he's leading him and showing him. And I think all Donald Trump is thinking of is the television cameras and the press and how they will show that he's in charge. But to be honest, actually, Kim Jong-un is actually very, very stable and strong in his stance. I actually wasn't expecting him to be come across as powerfully as he does. And he does that through his stillness. He's wonderfully still in the situation. You see Trump being a bit fidgety. And actually, if you want to be seen as the dominant party and the person in control, really, you want to be as still as possible. In China, they used to say, he who owns the silence owns the room. Well, actually, he who is stillest also owns the room.
Very, very interesting, Paul. Another little touch there in the earlier shot. There was one other question I wanted to put you, Paul Boross, body language expert there for us in London, been watching all these pictures, and I hope we can pull this one up. It's who was smiling in the initial sit-down after they stood up and shook hands, the formal handshake in front of those flags. They went inside, they sat in a couple of chairs, and Donald Trump took that traditional stance he has with his long tie between his legs akimbo, leaning forward, looking quite aggressive. Kim sat back and even smiled. Does that tell us about who's in charge of the dominance?
Yeah, well, actually, a smile denotes absolute confidence. So, in fact, being able to smile well is actually a big advantage, because when you see Donald Trump smiling, it's like half his face smiles. I mean, in order to smile, your eyes have to smile, your forehead has to smile, and actually, Kim is definitely winning on the smile factor. The smile is natural, or at least more natural than Trump's smile. So actually, in terms of confidence, actually, I think that Kim is doing rather well with his smile.